She walked into a gun store and immediately 3 men started laughing at her, saying she probably didn't even know which end of a gun was which. They mocked her for 10 straight minutes, making jokes about how she should stick to pepper spray. But when a military commander suddenly walked through that door, looked directly at her, and gave her the kind of salute reserved for war heroes, the entire room went dead silent, because they had just spent 10 minutes humiliating someone who had saved lives under enemy fire. Welcome to Stories of Black Lives. Before we dive into these powerful stories that cover themes of respect, justice, and hope, please let us know in the comments which country you're watching us from today. If you want to see more stories like this, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like our video. Imagine walking into a place where you know you don't quite fit the picture that people in that room have in their heads. You're not looking for trouble. You're not trying to prove anything. You just need to get something done. That was the case for Kendra Washington on a Saturday afternoon in Charlotte, North Carolina. When she pushed open the glass door of a local gun shop, the bell above the entrance gave a little ring as she stepped in. Kendra wasn't flashy in her appearance. She wore jeans, a simple gray hoodie, and her hair pulled back in a bun. Nothing about her screamed, "Look at me." Yet all eyes turned, and not in a friendly way. The smell of gun oil and old wood filled the air. Rows of rifles lined the walls. Glass cases displayed handguns, and behind the counter, a tall man in his late 40s adjusted his baseball cap before glancing at her. His smirk came quick, the kind that isn't born out of humor, but something else. Dismissal. Kendra noticed it right away, but she ignored it. She had trained herself to do that in her years of service. Not everything deserved a reaction. Not everyone earned one. She simply wanted to look at a reliable firearm for home protection. But before she could even take 3 steps inside, 2 men browsing by the counter exchanged words loud enough for her to hear. "Wonder if she even knows which end is which," one muttered. The other chuckled. "Probably just here to take selfies with a pistol." Their laughter carried thin and sharp, bouncing off the glass cases. Kendra kept walking, but a tightness built in her chest. This wasn't new. She'd had people size her up her entire life, whether because she was a woman in spaces men thought they owned, or because she was black in spaces people assumed she didn't belong. She put her hands in her hoodie pocket and kept moving, scanning the shelves. The clerk finally spoke. "Can I help you with something?" His tone was clipped, less like he wanted to help and more like he was challenging her to justify why she was even there. Kendra met his eyes for a second, then looked past him to the case of handguns. "Yeah, I'm interested in seeing something compact, reliable. 9mm, preferably." The man raised his eyebrows, almost amused. 9mm, huh? You sure that's not too much for you?" Kendra didn't flinch. "I think I'll be fine." One of the men near the counter let out another laugh. "Better watch out, man. She might show you up." The clerk smirked and shook his head. "Well, I guess we can see what we've got." Kendra exhaled slowly. She could already feel this wasn't going to be a simple errand, but she wasn't about to walk out just because the air in the room turned heavy. She'd dealt with worse. Much worse. In her mind, flashes of long, hot days overseas came back. Dust storms that seemed to scrape the skin right off your face. Nights broken by distant gunfire. Hours spent comforting soldiers who missed home or who had just lost a brother in arms. Those memories were stitched into her. No stranger in a gun store was going to make her crumble. Still, it hurt, and it angered her more than she wanted to admit. Not for herself, but because she knew what it meant. That no matter what you'd done, no matter what you'd given, some people only saw what they wanted to see. She placed her hand on the glass counter. Her voice was steady when she spoke again. "Let me take a look at that Glock 19. The clerk hesitated, then finally bent down and lifted it from the case. As he set it in front of her, his smirk lingered. She picked up the gun, feeling the balance, the weight in her hand. It was familiar, almost comforting. The room grew quieter, but the laughter wasn't gone. It lingered at the edge of the air, waiting for her to slip, waiting for her to confirm the small box they'd already put her in. But Kendra wasn't about to give them that satisfaction. But little did they know, someone was about to walk through that door who would flip the entire room upside down. The Glock rested in Kendra's hands, cool and solid. She didn't cradle it like someone holding something foreign or fragile. She handled it with muscle memory. Her fingers checked the grip. Her stance shifted slightly. And for just a moment, She was back on the range, standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers who trusted her with their lives. The clerk leaned on the counter, arms folded. "Not bad," he said with a smirk. "But you know, people usually start with something smaller, easier to control." Kendra looked up at him, calm. "I'm not a beginner." The man tilted his head, still unconvinced. "Sure you shoot before?" Before she could answer, one of the men nearby chimed in. "Yeah, come on, sweetheart. Tell us, what's the most you ever shot?" "A .22 at a carnival." His buddy laughed, nudging him like they'd just told the best joke of the day. Kendra put the gun back on the counter slowly with deliberate care. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of snapping back, but her patience had limits. "I've shot a little more than that," she said evenly. The clerk raised a brow. "Like what?" "A .380. Kendra studied his face, then simply said, "Try an M249. That landed like a brick." The laughter from the corner died down, replaced by awkward glances. The clerk blinked, caught between disbelief and trying to hold his smug ground. The taller man from the group leaned forward. "What did you say?" Kendra repeated herself, her voice clear. "M249, light machine gun, belt-fed, fires about 750 rounds per minute. That kind of thing." The store went quiet again. For a moment, the sound of a refrigerator humming behind the counter filled the silence. Then, as if he had to rescue his pride, the clerk let out a forced laugh. "Well, I'll be. Look at you talking the talk. Maybe you did read a manual or two." His words carried sarcasm, but his eyes betrayed something else. Hesitation. He hadn't expected that answer. Kendra stayed composed. She wasn't looking to prove herself to anyone in that room, but she wasn't going to let herself be shoved into a corner either. Another customer, an older man by the ammo shelf, had been watching quietly. He finally spoke up. "Sounds like she knows more than half the folks that walk in here." The clerk shot him a quick look, as if annoyed by the interruption, then turned back to Kendra. "All right, let's say you've handled bigger guns. That doesn't mean you're ready to buy one of these. What do you even need it for?" That question dug deeper than the rest. It wasn't just condescension. It was a challenge to her very reason for being there. Kendra drew in a steady breath. "For the same reason anyone else here would buy one. Safety. Security. Because it's my right." Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. The men at the counter shifted uncomfortably, and even the clerk looked like he didn't know what to fire back with. Kendra placed her hands flat on the glass. She could feel the stares pressing in from all sides, the silent judgment trying to push her out the door, but she didn't move. She wasn't leaving until she decided to. The two men who had mocked her earlier whispered to each other again, but this time their laughter was smaller, more forced. Something about her tone unsettled them, though they'd never admit it. Kendra stayed rooted inside. Her heart ticked faster than she let on. She wasn't immune to the sting. Each word, each chuckle dug at her, but she'd spent too many years learning when to hold steady. Then the older man near the ammo shelf spoke again. His voice was calm, respectful. "Young lady, don't mind them. Some people don't recognize strength when it's standing right in front of them." Kendra turned her head slightly and gave him the smallest nod. She appreciated it, even if she didn't want to show too much in that moment. The clerk shifted, suddenly more interested in polishing the glass than in keeping up the smirk. The men in the corner looked restless, like they were waiting for something else to happen, and they were about to get it. But before the tension could settle, the door opened again, and this time it wasn't just another shopper stepping inside. The bell over the door jingled again, but instead of anyone paying attention to who walked in, the group of men near the counter kept their focus on Kendra. The clerk, emboldened by their attention, leaned forward with a grin. "You know, it's funny," he said, his voice carrying through the shop. "People watch a few movies, maybe play some video games, and then they come in here thinking they're experts." One of the men barked out a laugh. "Yeah, what's next? She's going to tell us she was special forces or something." The laughter spread louder now, bouncing against the gun cases and racks of hunting gear. The sound carried that sting of mockery meant not just for her, but for anyone who didn't meet their unspoken checklist of who deserved respect. Kendra set her jaw. She had half a mind to put the Glock back in its place and leave. But walking out now would be giving them what they wanted, proof that she didn't belong, and that wasn't an option. Instead, she turned the gun in her hand, checked the slide with practiced ease, then set it back on the counter as calmly as if nothing had been said. The clerk raised his brows, surprised by how smooth she was with it, but he covered quickly with another jab. Not bad. Still, if you're planning on buying, you might want something lighter, something that won't knock you over. The man's friend cackled at that, doubling over. Yeah, man. We don't want her flying across the room when she pulls the trigger. Kendra finally spoke, her tone even. I can handle recoil. Handle recoil? The clerk chuckled, shaking his head. Lady, you probably couldn't handle loading a mag without help. That one hit harder because it wasn't just dismissive. It was meant to belittle her on the most basic level. The older customer by the ammo shelf glanced at her again, like he wanted to step in, but wasn't sure if it was his place. His silence said a lot, but his eyes carried sympathy. Kendra placed both hands flat on the counter. She leaned just slightly forward, not aggressive, but steady. I don't need anyone's help. Her words cut through the laughter, which dimmed for just a moment, but the men weren't finished. Come on, sweetheart, the taller one said. Why don't you show us? Let's see you rack that slide. Bet you can't do it without struggling. The clerk smirked, clearly entertained. Yeah, why don't you? For Kendra, it wasn't about proving herself to them. It wasn't even about pride. It was about refusing to shrink. She picked up the Glock again, checked the chamber, and in one fluid motion, racked the slide with ease. The sound echoed, a clean, sharp click that cut through the smug grins. Silence followed for a second, then the shorter man forced a laugh. Well, anyone can do that. Doesn't mean she knows how to use it for real. The clerk jumped in, eager to keep the mockery alive. Yeah, you know, it's one thing to play around in here, but this isn't a toy. This is serious. People get hurt when they don't know what they're doing. Kendra put the gun back down, her face calm, though her pulse was racing. She thought of the faces of soldiers she'd trained, men who had once doubted her, too, until they saw her fire on target after target without missing. But she wasn't about to share her story with this crowd. Not yet. The clerk leaned back, looking satisfied. Tell you what, why don't you look at some pepper spray instead? Might be more your speed. The laughter erupted again, harsher this time, filling the room. Kendra's hand twitched slightly against the counter, but she kept her composure. She wasn't here to give them a show. The older man at the ammo shelf finally raised his voice, tired of the nonsense. That's enough. The room shifted. Everyone turned toward him. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. You boys think it's funny to mock somebody you don't even know? Maybe keep your mouth shut and let folks do their business. The clerk frowned. Relax, Walter. We're just joking around. Doesn't sound like a joke, the older man replied. His eyes met Kendra's again. Don't let them get under your skin. Kendra gave the smallest nod. She appreciated the support, but the damage was done. The air was thick with hostility and mockery, and no amount of calm breathing could erase the sting of being singled out in that way. Her hand brushed against the counter as if grounding herself. She was seconds away from deciding she'd had enough. But before she could make that call, the sound of heavy boots on the floor signaled the arrival of someone whose presence would change everything. The heavy steps echoed against the wooden floor, but the clerk and his friends barely noticed. Their attention was still fixed on Kendra, feeding off each other's laughter like wolves circling prey. The clerk leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to keep others from hearing. You can keep pretending all you want. Truth is, this isn't a space for you. People like you come in here trying to prove something, and it never ends well. The taller man chimed in, his grin stretched wide. Yeah, better to leave the heavy lifting to the real shooters, am I right? His friends snorted in agreement, elbowing him. Kendra's jaw tightened. She wanted to walk out, to throw the door open and let it slam behind her. But walking out wouldn't stop them from doing this to the next person who looked like her, who didn't fit their narrow view of who belonged. So she stayed put. She leaned forward slightly. Her voice was calm but firm. You don't know a thing about me, and you don't have to. I don't owe you an explanation. The clerk raised his brows. Well, you sure sound like you've got something to hide. Anybody can talk big. Show me some credentials, then maybe I'll believe you. His challenge stung, not because she couldn't meet it, but because he assumed she needed his validation. Kendra straightened, her shoulders squaring. I don't have to prove anything to you. The laughter returned, sharp and mocking. The shorter man clapped his hands dramatically. Ooh, she's tough. Watch out, boys. We've got a real warrior in the house. The taller one added. Yeah, until she drops that thing and hurts herself. For Kendra, it was no longer just about their words. It was about the eyes in the room. Every other customer was watching silently, some with pity, some with discomfort, but none stepping forward except the older man by the ammo shelf. Their silence was almost as loud as the laughter. She remembered nights overseas when her unit doubted her, when every move she made was scrutinized twice as hard. Yet she had outlasted them all, her record speaking louder than any insult. That same fire stirred now, pushing her to stand taller. She picked up the Glock again. Her grip was steady, her motions fluid. She aimed at the back wall carefully, finger off the trigger, and then lowered it again. She didn't need to say a word. Her actions spoke for themselves, but the clerk chuckled anyway. Nice little show. You practiced that in the mirror. The men roared with laughter again. It was uglier this time, harsher, like they needed to drown out the uncomfortable silence creeping in from the rest of the store. The older man near the ammo shelf shook his head. Pathetic, he muttered, not even hiding his disgust. The clerk spun toward him. Excuse me. I said. It's pathetic, the man repeated louder this time. The way you're treating her. I've been in this store for years, and I've never seen a customer mocked like this. You're out of line. The clerk's smirk faltered, but only for a second. Relax, Walter. We're just messing around. No harm done. Walter's voice hardened. You call that harmless? That's not harmless. That's disrespect, and you know it. The two men near the counter shifted uneasily, suddenly less amused. They didn't like being called out, especially not by someone they recognized. Kendra took a breath. She was grateful for Walter's words, but she didn't want to be defended like she couldn't stand for herself. She spoke again, her voice cutting through the thick air. I've faced worse than this. You think you're intimidating me? You're not. You're just showing the world what small looks like. That silenced them. Even the clerk, for a moment, had no comeback. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Then, before anyone could respond, the sound of a deep voice rolled across the room. Sergeant Washington. Everyone turned. The door had barely swung closed behind the man who had just entered. He wore plain clothes, but his bearing was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, upright stance, eyes sharp and commanding. The clerk blinked in confusion. Oh, what? The man walked forward with purpose, his boots hitting the floor like a drum beat. He stopped just a few feet from Kendra. Without hesitation, he lifted his hand and gave her a crisp salute. The store froze. But this wasn't just respect. It was recognition, and it was about to shatter everything those men thought they knew. The salute hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Colonel James Riverside stood tall, his hand raised with precision and reverence, the kind that wasn't done lightly or as some empty gesture. It carried weight. It carried history. The men who had mocked Kendra went silent instantly. Their laughter, their smirks, all of it drained away as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The clerk's mouth opened, but no words came out. Kendra blinked, taken off guard herself. She hadn't expected to see him here of all places. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she returned the salute, her hands steady, even though her heart was pounding. Colonel Riverside, she said softly. His face broke into the faintest smile as he lowered his hand. It's good to see you again, Sergeant. That word, Sergeant, landed like a hammer in the room. The men by the counter exchanged glances, the bravado slipping right out of them. Walter, the older customer, crossed his arms and watched with quiet satisfaction. The clerk cleared his throat, his voice shaky. Wait, Sergeant, you mean she's actually? Riverside cut him off without even looking his way. Kendra Washington isn't just any veteran. She carried her unit through some of the worst firefights in Kandahar. I watched her drag 2 wounded soldiers out under fire when most people would have frozen. She earned the kind of respect you can't buy or fake. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Kendra felt every pair of eyes on her. But for once, it wasn't judgment. It was shock, disbelief, and maybe even shame. The taller man who had laughed the loudest earlier finally muttered, "No way. You're saying she?" "Yes." Riverside interrupted again, his tone firm. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Kendra looked at him, her expression calm, but her chest tight. She hadn't wanted this kind of scene. Her military service was a part of her, yes, but she never used it as a shield. Yet, in this moment, she was grateful Riverside was here to speak the truth others needed to hear. Riverside turned to her fully now, his voice dropping slightly, more personal. You saved lives, Sergeant. Men still talk about it. Don't let anyone here make you forget who you are. Kendra nodded, her throat tight. Thank you, Colonel. The clerk shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. His earlier arrogance evaporated. I didn't know, he stammered. Riverside's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. That's the point. You didn't care to know. You judged her before she even said a word. You saw what you wanted to see. The shorter man from the group muttered something under his breath, but Riverside's eyes pinned him in place. Do you have something to say? The man shook his head quickly. No, sir. Riverside's attention returned to Kendra, his expression softening again. It's people like you who remind me what this country stands for. You deserve better than this. The words carried more than just respect. They carried conviction. The entire store felt smaller now, like it couldn't contain the weight of what had just been said. Walter spoke up again, his voice steady. I knew there was more to you. Glad to see I was right. Kendra managed a small smile in his direction. For the first time since stepping foot in the store, she felt something other than anger tightening her chest. She felt seen, but she also knew the moment wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been written off before being given the chance to show who they really were. The clerk rubbed the back of his neck, his face flushed. Look, I didn't mean any disrespect. Riverside cut him off one last time. Respect isn't something you give only after someone proves themselves to you. It should be the starting point. The room was silent again. The laughter was gone. The mockery was gone. All that remained was the weight of truth pressing down on everyone who had witnessed the moment. But the real test wasn't over yet. Because what would these men do now that the curtain had been pulled back? The silence after Riverside's words stretched long. You could have heard a pin drop between the racks of rifles and glass cases of pistols. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody smirked. The men who had been so loud just minutes ago now stared at the floor, their swagger stripped bare. Kendra shifted slightly, her hand resting on the counter. She didn't gloat. She didn't rub it in. That wasn't her way, but the change in the room was undeniable. The same people who had mocked her a moment ago now looked like schoolboys caught misbehaving in front of the principal. The clerk tried again, his voice quieter. Ma'am, I didn't realize who you were. If I'd known. Kendra cut him off, her tone even. You shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Her words landed harder than she expected. The clerk's eyes darted to the men beside him, as if searching for backup, but none came. They were just as cornered by the truth as he was. Riverside let the silence linger before speaking again, his voice calm but firm. I've led soldiers into places you can't imagine. Some broke, some thrived. But Kendra, she stood steady when everything around her was falling apart. That's the kind of person you mocked. The taller man swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance completely gone. We didn't know. Kendra turned to him, her eyes steady. Exactly. You didn't know, but that didn't stop you from judging. The shorter man rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her gaze. We were just messing around. Walter, the older customer, scoffed from the ammo shelf. Messing around, son? You call humiliating someone messing around? That's the kind of thinking that keeps the world ugly. The man's face turned red, but he had no reply. Riverside stepped closer to Kendra, his voice lowering so only she could hear. You don't need to prove anything to them. You've already done more than enough. Kendra nodded, her voice quiet. I know, but sometimes it's not about me. It's about the next person who walks in here. Riverside gave her a look that carried both pride and sadness, as if he knew the weight of always having to stand taller than the insults thrown at you. The clerk cleared his throat, desperate to regain some control of the room. Well, if you're serious about buying, we can find you something suitable. Kendra looked at him, her face unreadable. I'll decide what's suitable for me. His cheeks flushed again. Of course, ma'am. Whatever you'd like. The shift in tone was obvious to everyone. Gone was the smugness, replaced with a clumsy attempt at politeness, but it wasn't respect. It was fear, guilt. Kendra picked up the Glock once more, turning it in her hands. The weapon hadn't changed, but the way the room looked at her holding it certainly had. Where they once saw a joke, now they saw capability. Where they once saw an outsider, now they saw authority. But for Kendra, none of that mattered as much as the truth she'd carried all along. Her worth didn't hinge on their recognition. She had always known who she was. Riverside finally addressed the room as a whole, his voice steady. Maybe next time, think before you open your mouth. You never know who's standing in front of you, or what they've been through to get here. The words landed like a final verdict. The men nodded awkwardly, mumbling half-hearted agreements, but the shame on their faces said enough. Walter smiled faintly, nodding toward Kendra. Seems to me you handled yourself just fine, even without backup. Kendra gave a small smile in return. I've had practice. Riverside chuckled softly, the tension easing just slightly, but he looked around one more time, making sure his message had sunk in. His eyes lingered on the clerk, who quickly busied himself stacking papers that didn't need stacking. For Kendra, the room felt different now, not lighter, but clearer. The masks had been ripped off, the truth laid bare. She had walked in alone and been treated like she didn't belong. Now standing tall with Riverside at her side, she had reminded everyone exactly what belonging looked like. But the story wasn't finished yet. The aftermath of this moment would decide if the lesson truly stuck or if it would fade the second she walked out the door. The air in the store felt heavy, like everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. The clerk finally broke the silence, his voice stumbling. "Ma'am, Sergeant, I owe you an apology." His words came slow, awkward, like dragging stones across the floor. "I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. None of us should have." The taller man shifted uncomfortably, looking everywhere but at Kendra. "Yeah, we were out of line. Didn't mean nothing by it," the shorter one muttered. "Just fooling around." Kendra studied their faces. Their words sounded clumsy, but she could hear the cracks in them, the kind that came when shame set in. She wasn't interested in humiliating them further. She just wanted the truth to stick. She rested the Glock back on the counter and said quietly, "You don't have to salute me. You don't have to thank me, but you do have to remember that every person who walks in here deserves respect, whether you know their story or not." Walter spoke up from the ammo shelf again, his voice warm but firm. "That's the part too many forget. Respect should be the starting point, not the prize you hand out after someone earns it." The men didn't respond. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. Riverside nodded once, his arms crossing as he looked at them. "You should be grateful you learned that lesson today. She had the patience to stand here and show you. Someone else might not have." The clerk swallowed hard. "Understood." Kendra took one last look around the room. For a second, she thought about her soldiers, the young recruits who once doubted her until they realized she was the one keeping them alive. She thought about her parents who taught her that dignity wasn't something anyone could give or take away. Then she looked back at Riverside. "Thank you," she said softly. He shook his head. "Don't thank me. I just said what needed to be said. You've been proving yourself since the day I met you." Her chest loosened a little at that. For the first time since walking through the door, she felt like she could breathe. Walter walked over, placing a small box of ammo on the counter. "On the house," he told her. "For the next time you come in here when the air is not so heavy." Kendra smiled faintly. "I appreciate that." Riverside gave her a respectful nod. "Keep standing tall, Sergeant. You remind people like me why we wear the uniform." With that, he turned and headed for the door, his presence still filling the room even as he walked away. The clerk tried one last time to make it right. "Ma'am, if you ever need anything from this store, you'll get it. No questions asked." Kendra didn't reply. She didn't need to. She simply picked up her bag, walked past the racks of rifles and shelves of ammo, and pushed open the glass door. The bell above her rang again, but this time the sound wasn't mocking. It was freedom. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed over her face. She closed her eyes for a second, letting the warmth sink in. The voices behind her were muffled now, fading into the background. What mattered was the truth that had been spoken, and the weight of it would stay with them long after she was gone. As she walked to her car, she thought about something Riverside had said. Respect should be the starting point. That was the lesson. Not just for the clerk, not just for the two men by the counter, but for anyone who thought they had the right to judge someone before knowing their story. Kendra opened her car door, slid inside, and gripped the steering wheel for a moment. She whispered to herself, almost like a prayer, "Never let them decide your worth." She started the engine, and pulled out of the lot, the sun dipping lower behind her. The day had been long, heavy, but it had ended with truth laid bare. And truth had a way of lingering longer than mockery ever could. And that's the message I want you to carry with you. People are more than what you assume at first glance. Everyone has a story you don't see, battles they've fought that you'll never know. Don't wait until someone proves themselves to offer them respect. Lead with it. Give it freely. It costs nothing, but it changes everything. If Kendra's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. Respect people, not because of what you see, but because of what you don't see. Because the truth is, the strongest people often carry their strength in silence until the world forces it out of them. So, next time you meet someone, start with respect. You never know who you're really standing in front of.